Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video, we're back with another mid-season power ranking for Big Brother season. This time, obviously talking about Big Brother 27. Now, obviously, if you don't know what these videos are, they are videos where I run through first my general thoughts on the season up to this point, but beyond that also talk about the eliminated players so far, and also end up ranking the remaining players left in the game based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game. And with this video in particular, again, I'll probably end it off with a bit of a channel update, considering I should probably officially announce some changes that I'll probably be making in the near future. But obviously, again, most of this video will be talking about my general thoughts on Big Brother 27, which, again, typically I do this ranking at the final 11, which is actually a week later than I thought it was, considering I kind of forgot the fact that we had a 17-person season here. Though I am mentioning the fact that it doesn't seem like jury is starting now. It does seem like we're starting jury at 9, like we have the last couple seasons, considering there was no announcement of it, though to be fair, they might announce it next week. But again, we are technically halfway through the season, so again, this was the right time to do it. So let's start off. Again, what do I think of this season? I think it's a weird season, and I do find it to be a season that I just have a tough time wrapping my head around, where it's a season that it feels like we're always prime for like the worst case scenario to happen, at least for what I personally want, for like entertainment value, but then it just seems to work out anyway, where again, this is a cast of terrible players. Almost everyone's playing really suboptimally, yet despite that, the season's kind of worked out anyway, and it's very weird how that is the case, where it really feels like this is a cast of, again, very passive players at points, a cast of players that just make absolutely dumb decisions, and not necessarily in the most interesting way a lot of the time. Yet despite that, it feels like when we're going like result by result, the results of the season are pretty good. We're outside like the Jimmy elimination, I guess the Amy elimination, I feel like every other spot played out in one of the best possible ways. We're like week 1, we have this flip against Zay. Week 3, we get this really big dilemma between Adrian and Will, with Vince and Zach like flipping at the last second. Week 5, we got Zach not using his power somehow and getting himself voted out of the game. And then we get to this last week where it really felt like Mickey or Morgan were going home for almost the entire week. And then it just works out that Riley just gets sniped out of the game. And again, it just feels like a spot here where things are just working out, despite the fact that there are many points in this season where I feel like it should be a steamroll, where it feels like people like Vince and Zach had opportunities to really just take reins of the game and just didn't. We have, even this last week, Riley seemed like he was in a position to potentially run the game and then just didn't. And again, it just feels like we're on a cast here of just so incompetent of players that just leads to a very weird result here. Now, I'll be honest, straight up, I've not been following the live feeds of the season nearly as closely as I have the last couple seasons. I obviously, things that are posted online, though, again, I've done a lot less watching of the feeds itself in comparison to BB25 especially, but even like 26, which is also part of this weird aspect of the season, the fact that it is such a chaotic season with so many things flipping back and forth, that I just kind of lost interest in actually paying attention to all of the flip-flopping. I kind of am more invested in just seeing when things actually stick than seeing these players going around circles, only for all that to not really matter anyway. And I feel like that has played into kind of my lack of interest at points in following what exactly is happening on the live feeds, just because so much of what happens doesn't really seem to matter that much. But again, I do think this season has had an interesting trajectory. I think these last 2 weeks in particular played out in like the best possible way, but it feels like we're in another one of these spots where, again, this could potentially be a really massive steamroll depending on the results of this week, though again, considering how bad these players are, I don't really have that much faith in it actually happening, but we'll have to see. But either way, again, those are my general opinions on the season. Now let's talk about the boots so far. First, I'm talking about Zay, and straight up, Zay is someone that I thought wasn't that bad of a first boot here. Again, I don't think he does like that much actively wrong in the game. And he ultimately, again, had that fight with Rachel. That was, again, fun TV, to where I thought he at least brought something to the show. Now, again, on the feeds, he was a little bit problematic. And again, that's obviously a bit of an issue there. But in terms of like what he brought to the TV show, I actually thought he was a decently fine character for this season, especially in the way that he goes out. Then we move on to Amy, who, I mean, outside of being the mastermind's accomplice, she really didn't do much on it. Again, it was getting very frustrating by the time she went home, where again, she was talking with Ashley about not trusting Rachel. And again, all that was very frustrating, though. Amy as a whole, again, on the season, she was fine. I think it was a dumb move to take her out in the spot that she did for people like Jimmy, but ultimately her going didn't really lose us too much entertainment-wise. And then we move on to Adrian, who I think is probably one of the more disappointing super fans in the recent history, being a very weird fan. Like, I really don't understand his level of fandom. This, like, person who, again, is obsessed with the show, builds challenges in his backyard to practice on, but then also doesn't really care about the strategy of the game and talks about needing to play this like honor-bound game, which is again very weird. And again, he didn't really do much on the season, where really I think the most memorable thing about him is the fact that he loves bread, to where ultimately again Adrian just was kind of a disappointment, even though I don't think he's like the worst player in the world, considering he did almost stay, but also again he didn't have a good enough read in the house to actually push to stay and actually get the votes in a spot where he shouldn't have been going home anyway. But anyway, again, I think there's probably worse players than Adrian in the grand scheme of things. Next up, we move on to Jimmy. And Jimmy's someone that I was disappointed to lose so early. I mean, I think Jimmy's boot is really the only one this entire season where I was disappointed with the result, where I did feel like Jimmy was someone that obviously did not play optimally. Again, I think his week 2 HOH was pretty terrible, but it felt like his game was like going on the rise afterwards until just Mickey snipes him out of the game for no reason, which was astronomically stupid. And I thought he was a fun enough character, obviously a bit hammy, which can be annoying at times. So ultimately, I felt like Jimmy was a fun enough presence on the season to where I was kind of disappointed to lose him so early. And then we move on to Zach. And Zach ends up being so funny to me on the season, considering I had Zach as a number 1 frontrunner to win the season for the majority of the season. I felt like he was at least one of the more stable players. He had his power, which obviously he would use, and he was just very well liked in the house, where no one really wanted him out. To where, again, I thought there was no way Zach was going home before the jury, yet somehow he gets taken out before the jury in a spot where he somehow doesn't use his power, which is insane. Especially when he was like literally told that it's like 50-50 if he's on the block, which at that point it's like, why not just use your power? Like, I kind of get the notion of, oh, I didn't want Morgan to go on the block, but it's like, you'd rather you go home than Morgan? Like, I feel like that's weird considering their dynamic, and just in general, again, like, Zach, very weird person on the season. Doesn't seem like a bad guy. Again, I have nothing bad to say about him personally, but just, again, made a very dumb decision, though, again, still not even like one of the worst players on this season somehow. Sure, I do think he is probably too passive in the grand scheme of things, but again, he was well positioned for a decent chunk of the season, only get kind of sniped down the spot he did with, again, a pretty unfortunate HOH result with that, to where, and while he didn't bring that much entertainment on the season, I do feel like he at least had a pretty interesting downfall here. And finally, we got the most recent boot in Riley, and Riley sucks. And I'm so happy that Riley went home, where I think otherwise this would have been a very disappointing mid-season power ranking, because straight up, Riley might be number 1. And I was actually very worried in the last few weeks that we would be leading up to a spot where I had to have Riley as my number 1 person on the mid-season power ranking, and that would have been very disappointing. Yeah, again, we're thankfully in a world where he gets sniped out of the game, and I can't believe this happened. Again, it really feels like a spot where like everything had to align in a specific way for us to happen, where like almost none of the legwork to actually make this vote happen seemed to actually be going through, and then all of a sudden at the last second, all the votes end up aligning here, which is pretty insane. And insane considering, again, Riley was a massive frontrunner to win this game. I mean, he was someone that most of the house really loved. He was someone that had some blindly loyal allies to him, and it felt like there was just almost nobody that was going to put him up in a spot where he would actually go home, and it felt like one of the only opportunities to actually snipe him out of the game. And again, I'm shocked that he was actually sniped out of the game, and thankfully he was, considering, again, he sucks. His relationship with Catherine was just so uncomfortable. The way he treats her, the way he talks to her, the way he talks about her, all that is very strange, all very toxic. Also, he's not that good of a player. Or despite the fact that he did have this, again, like contingent of the house that was like blindly loyal to him, he also didn't really care about any of that, where I feel like really all he cared about was him and Kat. He also was playing on targeting people like Keanu and Kelly who were blindly loyal to him. He also pushed for Lauren to use the veto in a spot where that's what got him on the block and got him sent home, to where Riley sucks in almost every single way. Though again, technically not the worst player ever, considering, again, he had good social connections and people liked him. But again, another player here that was just really bad, especially strategically in this season. And again, I'm happy he's gone. But with, again, now we're down to the people left in the game. We have 11 players to be ranking here, and I'll be ranking them based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game at this point, which again is a mix of multiple facets. I am going to be mixing in the current game position, at least at the time of this recording, the Friday morning before this video comes out, the morning after the Riley eviction, which obviously at this point we do know that Vince is the HOH. Or at the time of this recording, I do not know his nominations for sure, so that will be playing a factor into this ranking. Though again, the ranking will be kind of like a mix of people's longevity in the game, all along with also winning prospects and then also short-term safety. So again, with that, let's start off at number 11. The player who I think is in the worst position to go on to win the game at this point is Mickey. And Mickey is such a weird player here because just a few weeks ago, I had her number 1 in the power ranking. She was consistently number 1 or number 2 in the power ranking for me up to like midweek 3. And then again, things went down a bit where she started to get targeted by the opposition. But again, her game started to recover a bit until she just has this colossal downfall where, again, it is kind of insane that her taking over Riley's HOH actually played out worse for her than it would have otherwise, where otherwise, again, I think if she's on the block by Riley, she could at least survive in that position and still have like the full trust of her allies and still be in a good position with what she did. And again, turning against Jimmy, burning a lot of her allies, really becoming the dictator in the house. It really just feels like she completely sunk all of her credibility in the game, where it feels like no one likes her. Everyone's okay if we're going home. And that's kind of the spot that we're in right now, where Vince is targeting Mickey, last I saw. And I do feel like if Mickey is on the block by the end of the week, she's going home. Straight. If it was a Mickey Riley nomination by the end, I think Mickey handily would have went home. So she very much got saved by the blockbuster last time. Now we are in a spot where, again, the plan is to nominate her up front to where she will have 2 opportunities to save herself. But ultimately, Mickey is in a spot here where I think it is pretty dire. She is very unlikely to survive this round. If she does survive this round, she's still going to be a target for a decent amount of the house. No one really trusts her at this point. And beyond that, also, I don't even know what her win equity is anymore. I think it was a spot where people were looking at Mickey as a good player and that Mickey would win if she got to the end. However, I do think the more that's been going on with her, I feel like the less people actually respect her. And I feel like even jury prospect wise, it might be a little rougher than what it was. To where ultimately, again, Mickey just feels like a player here that had so much potential, but then just got so domineering and really just sunk her entire game, along with also making some really terrible decisions. Again, her taking out Jimmy, her deciding to target Rachel, her initial decision to trust Riley, despite the fact that Riley was targeting her. Also, mixed in the fact that she also campaigned against Morgan, only to then proceed to keep Morgan. It's just all insane. Or Mickey ended up being, like, again, a disastrously bad Big Brother player here. So again, not one without any skill for the game, but definitely some terrible strategic decision making here. And I think she is the most likely to go home this week with also very little winner prospects. So again, I have her here at number 11. Now number 10. And I think this is a bit of a tough one. But for me, it's really this debate on short-term safety or long-term prospects. And because I'm in this spot currently where, again, I'm not fully sure on the nominations, and obviously there's so much that can change with Blockbuster and Veto, and just also the hecticness of this house, I think I am going to go long-term prospects first here. So at number 10, I'm going to go Kelly. And Kelly is a player here that really has been towards the bottom of my power ranking the entire season. Obviously, she volunteered for the block multiple times, was on the block for most of the early season, was in a spot where she was likely going home in a lot of positions there, though, again, one Blockbuster week 1, had her secret veto week 2, one Blockbuster again week 3. Like, Kelly is someone that has been in a lot of danger early on, and despite that, doesn't seem to have gotten that much respect for it. Now, at the time that she was winning the Blockbusters, there actually were people talking up Kelly as being this, like, unstoppable competitor. Yeah, it feels like talk of that has kind of died down, especially considering she's gone a bit more under the radar in the last few weeks. Back to the point where I think people just simply do not respect Kelly. They really bring her up as kind of this, like, baseline of, I'd rather vote for this person over Kelly. And it really feels like Kelly is just someone that is going to have some very tough prospects to win the game. I feel like it's going to be very difficult for Kelly to win the game, as I just think no one really respects her. And to be fair, there's a decent amount of people in this season that people don't seem to have that much respect for, but even with those players, I feel like they at least have more of a backing around them, where I feel like Kelly's just kind of alone in the game for the most part. Again, she does have a connection to Keanu. She obviously has that connection to Vince, but again, that's obviously been severed, and Vince doesn't really care about her and is talking about, again, her as a potential nominee still. And I think that is the spot that Kelly's kind of in, is that she's kind of just this, like, backup nomination for a lot of people. I feel like she's just this person that is just kind of easy to throw on the block, and whether or not she ends up on the block this week is kind of irrelevant, because I feel like no matter what, she's just going to be this perpetual pawn that will just go out whenever she's next to someone less expendable. And it really just feels like a spot here where Kelly is someone that I would be surprised if she made it to the end. I just feel like there's too many opportunities for her just to be kind of sniped out of the game from this point forward, while also is a terrible player and made some really terrible strategic decisions across the game, while also seemingly having no win equity, to where ultimately, again, I do not feel good about Kelly's prospects in the game here. So while, again, I don't know how much danger she's necessarily going to be for this specific week, I do think long term her prospects are pretty bad. So again, I'm going with her here at number 10. Now number 9. Now we're moving on to a player that is a bit tough to rank here, again, also without knowing the nominations, as I feel like this is a player that at the time of this recording seems relatively safe. So while there's, like, some talk about putting this person up as a pawn, I do feel like there isn't as much talk about this person going home. But I think realistically, their game is essentially just a slightly better version than Kelly's at this point. And that person is Catherine. And Catherine is in a spot here where I think she has room to recover. Unlike Kelly, who I do think is probably going to struggle no matter how far she goes in the game, I feel like Catherine's actually a player that is active enough and has a, like, good enough read on the game to where I could see Catherine definitely recovering her game from this point forward. However, obviously in the point that I'm doing this mid-season power ranking, she just lost Riley, who is a very integral number for her. Mind you, also someone that was kind of harming her in the game as well. But again, for the most part, I think still having a number 1 ally that's blindly loyal to you is still such a great benefit in this this game. Though, again, something that I think came as a negative to Catherine is the fact that Riley was looked at as the person keeping Catherine in the game to the others, and through that, Catherine had very low respect from a lot of the other players. Also, Catherine would spend most of her time with Riley, and through that, she would just not have the connections with other players. Where now, with Riley gone, I actually do have some faith in Catherine to maybe pull this back together, especially because, again, it doesn't seem like she's a target for this week. No one's really talking about taking her out exactly, to where, again, while there's obviously room for her to be kind of sniped out of the game, I do feel like Catherine should be fairly safe at this point, but again, this is still a ranking based on long-term prospects, and I just think in comparison to the next person we'll be talking about, I think Catherine is more similar to Kelly than that next player. Someone that I do think doesn't have as many allies in the game, or really at this point, Kat only has like Lauren and kind of Kelly and Keanu, but it's like Kat has any real connection to them. So I feel like that is the main reason why Kat is so low here, is just because, again, there's not really a backing around her. There's not really this like group of people that would actively like pushing for her to stay in the game. But she's also just, again, not looked at as a big enough threat to take out. Again, there's our other priorities. And again, I feel like those inroads there will give Catherine some potential moving down the road. Yeah, I feel like based on where we are right now, her current game position, it's still not great. It's still a spot where I don't think she has much win equity. It's still a spot where I don't feel like she's even in the greatest position long term. Though, again, I do think there is room for her to build that up. But as of right now, I do think it's simply just not there. So, again, I have her here number 9. Now, number 8. And at number 8, we're moving on to a player that I'm actually surprised this high. I actually came into this week thinking that she would be at the very bottom, depending on the HOH results. And we didn't get the greatest HOH result for her, but we also didn't get the worst. To her ultimately at number 8, I do have Rachel Riley, which also, with that, I guess I should mention the fact that Rachel Riley's on this season, because I obviously haven't talked about that properly on a video. Last time I talked about BB27 in a formal video was the cast assessment, where we didn't know Rachel was on at that point. And again, I talked about the rumors of her potentially being on, but I didn't think they were real. I didn't think that she would actually be a full-on player. I thought she would just be someone murdered in the first week. But no, Rachel Riley is officially playing BB27, and it's kind of insane to see her play here. Again, it is insane to see a modern Rachel Riley, one that is, again, a lot more mature, one that has a lot more game savviness to her. As, again, I think Rachel is someone that, even though her game isn't playing out particularly well for the long term, I actually do feel like Rachel has very much improved as a player, and I actually think is coming out of this very much improving my thoughts on her as a player. Mind you, not to some significant degree. It's not like I currently think of her as in the upper echelon amongst the all-time greats gameplay-wise. But again, I do think she probably climbs up a good 10 to 15 spots on my ranking of every player if I were to redo that now. And again, still room to grow. To where, again, Rachel is easily the best player in this house. I think she's the player with the most stable strategic mind, someone that knows what they should be doing. And again, obviously that's to be expected of a sole returning player. But again, she's around players that are so much worse. Though with that said, again, going back to the actual ranking here, Rachel is in a weird spot. Obviously, again, Vince is HOH, and through that, Rachel should theoretically be in a lot of danger. I mean, Vince and Rachel have had this ongoing feud for weeks now, yet at the time of this recording, it doesn't seem like Rachel is Vince's main target, at least, where, and she might end up on the block, but it does feel like the main priority here is Mickey, which would be perfectly fine for Rachel. And again, there's still a shot that things go wrong. Mickey wins a competition and Rachel then becomes the target and ends up being taken out in that spot. But even then, it's not even a full guarantee that Rachel would even necessarily go home, depending on who the nominations are, obviously. Again, I think if she's against her own allies, then yeah, she's probably gone. But again, there's a shot she's up against, again, a Kelly, a Catherine, and through that, again, who knows where the votes ultimately land. And again, I think Rachel's in the spot now where, again, she's not in the most immediate danger as I thought she was going to be coming into this week. And I do think Rachel actually has a decent backing around her if she's able to survive this round. It does feel like the likes of Morgan and Ashley and Will do legitimately want to take Rachel fairly deep into this game. And I feel like that is a very good position for Rachel at this point. A lot of her also having this weird relationship with Keanu, which for Keanu at the time this recording is pushing for Rachel to go on the block. But again, I do think they will repair that relationship eventually. And again, I do think Rachel actually has some decent prospects if she is to survive this round. The question for me, and this has always been the question of Rachel on this season, is win equity. And I think that is the tough thing to really see for Rachel, as I do think there is going to be a lot of anti-returnee sentiment. We've already seen it a lot in the house. And while it hasn't led to Rachel's elimination, it has led to a lot of talk about how, we want Rachel on the jury, but we don't want her to win. And I feel like it's a spot here where I do find it tough to see Rachel really winning a jury vote on this season. And I think ultimately if she does get to the end, against most people, I think a lot of the discussion would be based around, do we want Rachel to win this season? As again, I think that's going to be something that a lot of these players simply just wouldn't want. They wouldn't want this person who's already won to win again, and when again it was their time and Rachel took it from them. Where I think that is definitely a major worry for Rachel's prospects in terms of win equity, but even then, there is still some talk here and there in the house about how, like, oh, if she gets to the end, she'll win. And again, I just really don't know how exactly it's going to land. I would still lean towards, again, it being pretty tough for her to win a jury vote, but again, it's not this clear-cut thing anymore. And I feel like because, again, it's why she's not at the bottom of the ranking anymore. Again, I think if she survives this round, which is, again, is definitely a danger spot for her, she does have a decent backing around her. And obviously, again, comps would have to play out in an optimal way. And to be fair, she probably would need to comp her way to the end to gain the respect to win the game. But I still feel like there is that winner potential there. And I do think her actually making, again, such a big move in this last week and taking out Riley is something that's just going to add to her resume if she were to get to the end, to where, again, I don't think she's completely drawing dead in a jury vote like I actually thought she was probably a few weeks ago. Though it's still, again, not looking great. And again, she still has a tough path there. But again, I think in comparison to the people we've talked about so far, who all of them I don't think are likely winners at this specific point in the season, where I at least see a path for Rachel to get to the end and win this season. For me, again, that's good enough to put Rachel here, number 8. Now, number 7. Now we're moving on to a player that's also in a weird spot, also talked about as a potential nominee. Though, again, not someone I see going home this week, but also not one that I do think has a bit of worrying prospects, but has more of a backing around them. That player is Ashley. And again, Ashley was my winner pick for this season, and that didn't turn out great. I'm shocked Ashley is still there. I love how, like, literally at the beginning of the season, we saw her taking a shower and getting targeted for it, and I thought that was really the end of my winner pick, only for her to somehow still be in the game at the halfway point, in a spot where, well, she does have allies. Again, she has Will as a very solid ally. She has Mickey wanting to work with her now, I guess, even though Mickey's probably gone. And she obviously has Rachel. I do think Ashley is someone that I just find to be a massive enigma as a player, as I feel like she's like one of these players that are like these minor points where she starts to do things well and actually plays pretty optimally, like her ultimately voting out Riley here, her initially pushing to keep Jimmy, though it also feels like there's other points where she just like turns on Rachel for no reason or lies to Rachel about what Mickey's saying about her. And again, it just feels like there's points where I just don't understand where she's necessarily coming from, to where, again, it just feels like there's points where, again, her gameplay is just so needlessly sloppy. And again, she also has some like bad reads at points with like her and Zach, where she thought Zach was like really loyal to her when he never was. Still, it feels like a spot here where Ashley is essentially in Rachel's position, but just a bit safer. Again, she has the same allies, essentially. She has less of a target on her back, even though, again, she's still someone that definitely can be nominated and be put up as a pawn and, again, just accidentally go home. Like, that's still definitely very viable for Ashley. Again, she's still someone that isn't, again, a primary target, but also someone that has a decent amount of allies. I think, obviously, some negatives here, the fact that I don't know if Ashley can win a jury vote. I think that's going to be a bit tough. Now, again, there are a lot of people that I think is tough to see win a jury vote, to where, again, someone has to win. Even if Ashley's at the end against, like, Will, I think Will will probably beat her. Unless she really goes on this, like, endgame comp run, which so far she hasn't been the greatest of comps. Again, I don't know how Ashley's win equity is necessarily going to go. Yeah, again, in comparison to Rachel, I just think she's safer in the game than Rachel. And again, she definitely could go out by accident. But I also think the lack of there being this, like, anti-returnee sentiment with Ashley also helps her as well here in this ranking. So realistically, I don't think she's actually that different from Kelly's placement on this list, outside the fact that she has more of a backing around her. And I feel like, again, with that backing, it's good enough to put her higher on this list, even though she is in, again, a level of danger at this point. But again, I think it's good enough to put her here number 7. Now number 6, and at number 6, we're moving on to a player that has been towards the top of my power ranking for really the last couple weeks, where they've always been hovering around the 1, 2, 3 spot, though I do think their positioning has started to decline. I don't feel like the Vince HOH was the grace for them, but that person is Ava. And Ava's a player here that, again, in a very fluid house, she's someone that hasn't ever really been talked about as being a potential target. Now, again, people talked about nominating her, especially after her HOH reign, where while I do think she had one of the better HOH reigns of the season, she still was, again, too passive a player and didn't really shore up those relationships well enough during it, while also having people like Vinny and Zach talking about putting her up next chance they get. Though, again, it does seem like Ava, at the time this recording, is safe this week, in the sense that Morgan, who obviously, again, is close to Vinny, is very much pushing to keep Ava safe as payback for Ava switching her vote. Really, outside that, I do feel like Ava is, again, just another player like Ashley. Some points, I think she has the right idea. I think there's other points where I'm just, like, very confused at how she got there. Like, I really, like, again, this entire last week, she was very pro Riley, wanting to keep Riley until, like, she had this last second change. But again, it was just so questionable, like, why is she care so much about Riley? Though, again, it does feel like Ava is someone that is still fairly well positioned. Now, again, she's lower on this list simply at this current point, because like Ashley, like Rachel, and really like everyone that we've talked about so far, I think there is still a struggle here on like, would she win a jury vote, where I'm really not sure, where again, I don't think people particularly respect Ava in this game, but again, it's another thing of like, again, who do they respect? There's not many players here that do have that much respect. So in that world, I think it's likely that likability is thing to be the edge at the end, and again, I think Ava's the more likable person out of her, Ashley, and Rachel, so I think that could benefit her there, even though again, I do think people don't really respect her game, and I feel like again, that is still going to be a major issue for long term. Well, again, her short term positioning is fine if she doesn't go into block this week, though again, it's another one that kind of like Rachel and Ashley could definitely find herself on the block and potentially sniped out in certain situations, though ultimately again, I feel like with Ava here, it's really a spot where she's this low due to, again, questionable win equity, while also there's still, like, again, a chance she ends up being nominated. So ultimately, I went with her number 6 here. Now number 5, and now we're moving on to essentially a better positioned version of Ava, someone that I actually think is one of the best positioned players in the entire house, with no one really targeting this person. Yet at the same time, I think the issue here is, again, long-term prospects. And at number 5, I do have Will. And again, Will is someone I really want to have higher, as again, I think in terms of short-term safety, I think Will is one of the highest on the board. Again, he is someone that is, again, not even talked about by Vince as a potential nomination at all. Someone that is largely affable to the entire house, while also still having a backing from the likes of Ashley, from the likes of Mickey, from the likes of Rachel. So again, there's a lot to like here for Will in terms of his current positioning. I think the issue for Will is, again, long-term, and I think that is the big thing with Will, is that I just struggle to see him actually winning this game, and a lot of that really comes down to how the end game is structured. Again, the way the competitions work out, to where, again, we haven't really seen Will play particularly well in challenges. Now, again, he's been throwing some, but still, it's still a spot where I don't think Will is obviously the type of build that would typically win a lot of endgame competitions, and really, I do see him very much in this, like, Cliff Hog sort of style of game. Probably less strategically active, which, again, is a bit frustrating from Will, but still someone that, again, probably will make it pretty deep at this point. I think I'd be pretty surprised to see Will go out before, like, the final 5, but I still feel like it's a spot where eventually Will is going to be sniped out, because he's not winning competitions. I don't even think his allies are people that are that likely to win competitions. I don't think people like Ava, people like Ashley are the most likely to be winning these endgame competitions. And even if they do, obviously they'll gain the respect from winning those competitions and potentially take him to the end. And even then, it's not even a guarantee that they do take him to the end. Mind you, I do think very likely Ava and Ashley are wanting to go to the end with Will, which again, he definitely would have a shot in those positions. I think he probably would handily beat Ashley, probably would be Ava, but again, that's not necessarily even a guarantee. But again, it's still a spot here with Will where I think he definitely has a lot of longevity in this game. I think he definitely is positioned very well on this season. Just the question is the win equity, both in the sense of getting to the very, very end, because I don't think he'll be able to comp his way to the end, but also once he gets there, if he doesn't comp his way to the end, would he have the respect from his fellow jury members, which again, I am not fully sure. So again, I think Will is, again, one of the better positioned players here that, and you would think would be higher because of that. Yeah, I do think the top 4 here are people that I think are more likely to actually end up winning this season. So because of that, for me, I have Will at number 5. Now number 4, and I cannot believe this player's at number 4. This is a player that had been towards the bottom of my power rank for pretty much the entire season, and have been slowly climbing up over the last week or so, and somehow they're here at number 4. At number 4, I have Keanu, and it's like, how did this happen? That Keanu is somehow still in the game, despite being targeted for first, 4 weeks of the season, and actually in a, okay spot to win this season. Now, mind you, Keanu will have to win out, but Keanu is someone that I think is fairly capable of potentially winning out, especially once we get towards the end game here. Again, these competitions that mix physical and mental, and we've seen Keanu do fairly well at those. So I actually do think Keanu is probably one of the most primed to win a lot of end game competitions. And again, at the end of the day, he's still going to have to win out. It's not going to be a spot where I think people would take him to the end. And I think he is still going to be in a lot of short-term danger here, where even though he is safe this week seemingly, where Vince talks about Keanu being off limits, which again, he should be considering a lot of other people would target Keanu. And again, it's a spot where Keanu will be targeted these following weeks. But again, if he's able to survive these next couple weeks, I think he could just easily steamroll the competition in the back portion of this season, kind of in the way that MJ did last season, to where I do think Keanu definitely has a path to the end. I do think Keanu's, again, the most likely person to really comp out for the rest of the season. And I think it's a spot where if Keanu gets to the end, I do think he wins. I do think it's a spot here where, even though, again, people are frustrated with Keanu at points on the season, we're very much annoyed at him early on, I think you could see this growing respect for him as time goes on. I think if he gets to the end, I think people will just feel like they have to vote for him, because how did he get there? How did this even happen? And I feel like this is a spot here where Keanu, I actually think, has climbed up to be one of the front runners to win this season. Again, he still has some work to do, where again, he would be higher if this was like a couple rounds later in the game and he was in this current position. But again, I think he got a very good HOH result this week. And if he's able to survive these next few rounds, I think he has a path to the end. So again, while his short-term safety is not particularly high, I do think his win equity is probably one of the highest on the entire board. And I do think Keanu has really just stumbled his way into a decent position here, somehow landing here at number 4. And now number 3. And now we're moving on to a player that I'm also surprised is this high, considering I had this person at the bottom of my power ranking the last week. I very much thought that this person was going home coming into this last week. Yet somehow they're at number 3, and that person is Morgan. And again, Morgan, I think, is another player here that seems to be a bit on the rebound, where after almost going home in this last round, again, in most situations probably would have gone home. It's still mind-blowing that she survived over Riley. She's in a spot now where Vince, her closest ally, is HOH, and he's actually taking some of her input in. And beyond that, Morgan's obviously a very active player, someone that, again, you could laugh at some of the things she tries to do because, again, fairly ineffective at points, but she is someone that, again, is playing very hard, and I think people see her playing very hard. And obviously, again, that did lead to some people wanting to target her at points, but I think we're at the point now in the season where there's other priorities. There's people like Rachel, there's people like Keanu, people like Mickey, to where I don't think Morgan is really top of mind right now of people that need to be targeted, while also being someone that is fairly athletic. Now, obviously, she didn't perform the greatest at the wall, a competition that she had constantly talked over and over and over about how she's going to win, where, again, that's not great, but, again, she's still fairly athletic here, and she's kind of in a build similar to MJ, and I feel like there definitely is a chance that Morgan's able to really turn it on in the end game and start to win a whole bunch of competitions. Or if that's the case, then, again, I think she would be a clear front runner to win. I think if she gets to the end after winning a lot of competitions, you would think that respect would be there for her to win. Now, I do think her short-term positioning is not as good as the top 2 people we'll be talking about, which is the reason why she's below those 2 people, to where I actually think she probably has more win equity than the number 2 person on this list. Yeah, I do think Morgan is someone that could definitely creep up as a target a lot more than the number 2 person, where I feel like Morgan is someone that definitely will have some eyes on her by the mid-jury phase. Yeah, I think at this current point, again, right before the jury phase, seemingly, it doesn't really feel like that many people have their eyes on Morgan anymore. And with her, again, being someone that I could definitely see winning a lot of competitions and going on to win a jury vote, I do feel like I have to be somewhat high on Morgan. So ultimately, again, going to land her here number 3. Now number 2. And again, top 2 of the list here, where I think it should be fairly obvious who the number 1 is at this point, especially knowing who's HOH. But at number 2, I'm going to go with Lauren. And Lauren is a player that is just kind of frustrating in the game. Someone that is obviously a big super fan of the show. Yeah, someone that just comes off very young and is very indecisive. And again, a lot of that can be very frustrating when we see her in power. But really, Lauren, outside that, just seems like a fairly competent player. Someone that, again, is too passive, but still someone that's very likable. People like, not much talk about targeting her, while also still being, again, pretty athletic. Again, very young, athletic, to the point where, again, I could definitely see her comping out towards the end. I think her, like Morgan, are kind of in a similar body type to where you would expect someone like Lauren to be able to win a lot of endgame competitions. Now, I think in comparison to Morgan, I actually do worry about win equity. I feel like Lauren is, again, one of these people that I don't think is particularly respected. I think a lot of people see her as this, like, young, naive kid, and I do feel like it's going to be a little bit tougher to gain that respect from a jury perspective. But again, if she gets to the end by winning a lot of competitions, I think she will gain that respect. Though I think where we currently stand, I would suspect Morgan to be a bigger jury threat than Lauren. But again, I do think Lauren is safer than Morgan in the long term, where, again, I think Morgan is someone that people are just naturally sketched out by and will eventually become a target, where I feel like Lauren is someone that I don't know how soon she will become a target. And with also, again, Vince being HOH and Vince probably being the most loyal to Lauren, I think that's also good for her, to where obviously she was just blindsided this last vote, and that's not great, but I do think her short-term positioning is very, very good. I don't think anyone's coming for Lauren in the near future. Well, also, I feel like Lauren has a lot of potential to win out, while also having a decent backing around her. Again, she has people like Vince, she has people like Kat, people like Kelly at this point. So I do think Lauren has potential to win this game, though I don't know if Lauren's really a player that's giving me much confidence that she'll actually do that. But again, I think for this ranking, and on a cast this bad, I do have Lauren here number 2. And now number 1, the number 1 player on my mid-season power ranking for Big Brother 27 is unshockingly Vince. There shouldn't be much of a debate at this point, where I think Vince is handily the best position player in the game at this point, with him currently being HOH, while also having not many people directly targeting him, while also seemingly having a lot of respect as a player now. So now, mind you, again, he did flip against Riley, which did piss some people off, and while I did think he was initially going to get some blowback for that, with him proceeding to win HOH, that kind of nullifies all the blowback, because they don't have time to have blowback against them, because he just put them up. So again, I think it's a spot here where I do think this HOH was really big for Vince, where without this HOH, I think there would have been more of a debate on having him at 1 or 2 or 3. Yet ultimately, with this HOH win, I think this obviously secures his safety for the week, has him in a spot where he should be making a decision that doesn't really piss off too many people, while also being one of the more competent players on the board. Where really outside of Rachel, he probably is the best player here. Mind you, again, not great. I mean, Vince is, again, just kind of a frustrating player. In fact, again, he's a super fan that just is not active enough in the game, doesn't really push for what he wants as much in the game, where he has a lot of influence in the game. He has a lot of relationships with people like Lauren, people like Keanu, people like Kelly, people like Morgan, but he frustratingly doesn't really push his way. Again, he kind of gives way to whatever other people want and is like very scared of the blowback of things. And again, that's just a frustrating aspect of his game, though I do think that should go away the later we get into the game, where I think the closer we get to the game, obviously the less blowback from your decisions and the affecting your positioning in the game. And I think through that, I could definitely see Vince kind of turning it around later in the game once he recognizes that these decisions won't fall back on him as much. While also, again, despite how frustratingly he plays the game at points, he does have a lot of influence in this game. He does have the potential to really just steamroll this game. And again, he's had multiple opportunities now and hasn't really taken the reins. But I feel like this HOH here feels like a pretty big one for him. It really should set the tone for the rest of the season, where it really feels like the Riley eviction there really just kind of blew up the opposite side and now allow Vince to really just pick up the pieces. And while again, there's definitely a way that he plays this poorly and comes out of this with people coming after him, I do think based on what I'm seeing so far, again, up to the morning of Friday after he won HOH, going at least in the right direction. Again, potentially targeting Mickey, who I actually don't think is the optimal target for him. But again, someone that will receive like really no blowback, where everyone's fine with Mickey going. Also, if his secondary target's Rachel, that's also pretty good for him as the other competent player in the house. And where again, Vince is in the spot where even if he ends up on the block, I don't even know if he goes home, to where I think there's a lot of upside here for Vince. I think there actually is maybe a debate in terms of win equity, in a sense that Vince is like by far the most influential player here. But I think there's definitely a world where Vince kind of sucks at jury management, where it does feel like his default is kind of like blaming a lot of his issues on other people, saying, oh, they tricked me into doing this. And I feel like that's not going to work particularly well from a jury prospect standpoint. I feel like that is kind of the worry there for Vince. Yeah, I think currently from where Vince is in the game, he is one of the best positioned players in the house, with also a lot of things to point to in terms of things he did in the game, while also being talked about as a big player in the game, while also being capable enough on this cast, where ultimately, again, I think Vince in his current position with the HOH in hand should be the best position to go on to win the game, which is why he's here number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my mid-season power ranking for Big Brother 27. With that, let's get into the channel update, where, and this is something that's been kind of a long time coming. I've been kind of talking about it on my live streams here and there, but I guess this is the formal spot to announce this, that there are going to be some changes with the channel moving forward, where straight up, I've been doing this channel the way I have for 5.5 years now, 2 videos a week consistently, if not even more than that at points. And it's a lot. It's something that really has taken over a lot of my life, where really all of my free time ends up going into things related to the channel at this point. And again, this is purely a passion project of mine and something that, again, I do hold very dear and something I do want to continue. Yet, straight up, continuing the channel in the way that I currently do is simply unfeasible at this point. Not just from the sense that it's, again, taking up all my free time, but straight up, I have been having some more mental health concerns recently, some that I think clearly stem from how much I work on this channel, to where ultimately, again, I think this is a spot where I think it's time to kind of let go the notion of having to have 2 videos a week and run the channel in the way that I do. Mind you, you're not going to really notice that change in the immediate future, because I mean, this next month's worth of videos, at least in terms of the major ones, are already done. Well, also the ones that aren't done are videos that I kind of need to make anyway. Things like the AU versus the World player ranking and season ranking, the Big Brother 27 review, the Survivor Guatemala retrospective, which I'm going to be doing anyway. So it's, again, realistically, you're probably not going to notice a change in this upcoming month. It still probably will be 2 videos a week. However, I'll say beyond this month, I can still guarantee 1 video a week. I think there will definitely be 1 video a week on Saturdays. That video will be a Survivor or Big Brother, or again, a bigger reality TV show video, like what you can expect. However, again, in terms of doing 2 videos a week, I think that is something I kind of have to let go of at this point. Not that there won't be weeks where there are 2 videos. There definitely will be. However, I do think the consistency of Wednesday videos in particular is probably going to wane. I think the Saturday videos that are, again, Survivor, Big Brother related, those are the main priority at this point. Those will always be happening. But I think in terms of videos outside that, I think I'm going to put less pressure on myself to actually be making those videos. But again, there definitely still will be some over time. But again, it's just a spot where running this channel in the way that I have has just gotten to be too much. Videos have obviously gotten too long. It just takes me too long to make some of these videos. And I obviously have other things going on that I need to be focusing on as well. to where I'm actually shocked that I was able to continue doing this for as long as I have, to do 2 videos a week. Straight up, the intention was to always slow down anyway. However, I was going to try to hold out until Survivor 50. I feel like Survivor 50 was kind of this like big landmark point for the channel to kind of slow down a bit more. But again, I do think there's other circumstances going on now that make me feel it's better to stop now. And again, I still plan on remaining fairly consistent. There should be at least a video a week. Though I think it's a spot where obviously instead of like 8 videos a month, expect more like 6. But again, I'm not planning on stopping the channel. I am, again, planning on continuing on, still making the same style of videos that I do. And the videos I've said I was going to make in previous videos are still videos I am going to make. It's just, again, the consistency of when specific videos are kind of come out is, again, going to have to be a bit different moving forward. But anyway, again, that's just kind of where I'm at with the channel right now. Beyond that, again, those are my opinions of BB27. So again, still expect the season review, player ranking, and also other similar content for down the road. Also, we did also the Survivor 49 cast, where I will be doing a cast assessment, a bit of a weird one, but I can get to it. But again, that should still be coming out next week, hopefully. At least that's the plan. So stay tuned for that and other similar sort of content. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.